even without the microphone on. I was an actor at one point. Speak from the diaphragm, and sometimes I get a little loud, actually. Delighted to be here. There's energy in this hall. Isn't that great? I mean, in fact, the Fromm is being frommed with people and eating lunch and talking to each other, meeting friends. I love it. Everybody get a handout? All right. Yeah. Okay. There are other handouts. Sometimes some of them are too complicated or long to hand out every week, but they're online. You all should have instructions how to get them online and download them for yourselves. Okay. Philosophy. The philosophy course. Well, I'm a historian, not a philosopher, and at one point was a biologist in an earlier incarnation. So we're going to cover a lot of territory, which is not necessarily only philosophy. This is going to be a how one lives one's life kind of course that looks at a philosophical topic, but looks at it from so many different angles. It becomes a prism. So we will be ranging widely. Free will and what is that? Don't know why we have that on the screen. And nor do I know how to get it off the screen.
Professor, I'll send somebody over to take care of it. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. It's amazing. God is watching us. God's here. We're getting into God next week. God enters the picture. A little bit today. You'll see God. In fact, you'll see God on the screen today. Okay. So, free will and determinism, two major subjects. Okay, now because that's on the screen, the forward thing doesn't work. Of course.
We're going to try and make it as difficult as possible.
Sometimes God shows up in person.
Now try going back.
Okay. All right.
I'm watching, so I'll see if you have any.
God is watching. Okay. All right. We got that right screen up. Okay. The stakes. What are the stakes? This is an abstruse, abstract subject. You sit here and just for intellectual amusement. No, the stakes are very high. Belief in free will fundamentally alter our sense of morality, either support it or undermine it. It's almost universally understood by human beings that the choices we make are our own choices made freely. Often we don't have free choices, gun to our head, for instance, or we're trapped in a certain social economic situation. Our choices are limited, but we still feel we have this power of choice. And losing that belief in this power of choice could be calamitous. A code of ethics demand that we know the difference, not only know the difference between right and wrong, but be able to choose right and wrong, not have some sort of mechanism pointing us one way and pushing us one way or another. In classical world, this was the power of reason. You had the power of reason to choose the right way or the wrong way. In Christianity, religion, it's called moral liberty, the power to choose the right path. We'll get into that in a bit. To discern the good and choose the good. And if you don't, you choose the other side, it's your fault. Moral responsibility. Immanuel Kant made a big part of his philosophy about affirming the link between freedom and goodness. You can't choose. It can't be expected to choose the good if you don't have free choice. You have no praise or blame if you don't have free choice. To say we ought to do X implies that we can have a choice to do X. So it runs through all life, all American life, and America and all countries, life and politics. In fact, the American ethos, which is you can make something of your life and it's up to you to do it. That's a standard American individualist ethos. That demands an assumption that you have the free will to do that. And if you don't, your fault. In fact, a certain fellow called Barack Obama, a famous philosopher, said in his Audacity of Hope, which I'm sure we all read, American, quote, values are rooted in basic optimism about life and a faith in free will, said President Obama. Assumption that we all assume making our life possible. So what's going on? Well, for one, philosophy and science have been working at eroding that confidence forever, for 2,000 years, since the beginnings of philosophy, and getting ever more bold that, in fact, it's a delusion or illusion that you have free will because of the universal rule of cause and effect, material cause and effect. What happens if free will isn't true? Well, there it is. It may not change anybody's life, but it could make you less sure about some things. And I think that's important. I'm not taking a position on this. I'm giving you both sides of the argument. Free will, determinism, and all the muddy ground in between. We're going to spend some amount of time in that mud in between these two, because there's lots of discussion and different versions and variations on it. And I'm not going to get us too much into the thickets, because you're not philosophers, you're not even philosophy students, and I'm not a professional philosopher anyway. But we're going to try to see what people have said about this subject. And are we indeed puppets with some other hand in us that's not our own? Well, basic parameters of the discussion. Descriptive questions. What is determinism? What is free will? What are the possibilities within these two big tents? Substantive questions. In what ways, getting into the roots of things, in what ways might we be determined? In what ways might we have free will? And then prescriptive, such as what do I do about it? How can moral responsibility exist within determinism? And does an understanding of our position on free will and determinism affect our attitudes and actions? Possible questions. We'll, again, bounce around with all of those questions. All right. First place, where are we? There we go. What is the will? Don't worry, there won't be too many slides with many words on them. But at the beginning, in this first class, somewhat, the will is defined as the biddings involved in the mental action of thinking that feed into behavior. So thinking, we have a thought, it bids us to do something, and we act on it. Or, as David Hume said, impressions we get internally, which give rise to emotion of the body, something we do, a behavior. That both says will is a mental act that leads to a behavior. It doesn't say where that mental act came from. So that's one way of looking at what is the will. It's simply something from inside. I don't care where it came from, but it's leading us to a certain behavior. And then another form is negative liberty, the capacity to choose in ways that are unconstrained by forces external to the mind. So it's negative, meaning you're not being constrained to do it. You're free because no one's stopping you. That's why it's called negative. So if no one is putting a gun to my head or putting me in a prison or twisting my arm or putting moral pressure on me to do something I don't want to do, then I'm free to act. So that's the basic freedom in terms of nothing stopping me. That's negative freedom. And there's also positive freedom, which is this last one, internal freedom, that our will is not determined by stimuli, that we are owners of our acts. Owners means that we are responsible for them. The desire is accepted by our will, that the will has a choice of choosing. I want that piece of cake. I'm not going to have that piece of cake. My will has a choice of choosing to not act on a desire. If we're acting on our desires, then it becomes a question where those desires come from, and therefore are we free if we're acting solely on our desires, or we prove our freedom by not acting on a desire and being independent from that inner person. So it's not just like the other definitions, external, it's the inner person that I'm also having had freedom from. So that's that. It gets complicated. Positive power, responsibility. All right. So basically 3 categories. And actually it's basically 2 categories, but we'll talk about it. Hard determinism, everything has a cause, freedom's an illusion. From the Big Bang to now, every event was caused by something. And that event becomes a cause of something else. So everything that you do, and a thought is an event, has a cause. And where does that cause come from? It comes from a previous cause. Which comes from a previous cause? The great chain going all the way back to the Big Bang. So it's an illusion. You think that your thoughts and actions are free because they originated from a previous cause that started long before you were born. On the right side is libertarianism or free will. The will is metaphysical. The will is outside of that causal chain. It's outside of the material world, the Big Bang and such. It's coming from a different place, a metaphysical place, a spiritual place, whatever. And the classical world says it's reason, which is independent of the physical world. And then in the middle, how can we resolve these two people who do not both deny each other? The middle ground is compatibilism. Let's be compatible. Everything has a cause, right? Determinism said everything has a cause, fine. But the will is a different kind of cause. It's not a part of the causal chain. And we'll bounce this thing around. So again, determinism is incompatible with free will. On the right side, it agrees. Free will, indeterminism, agrees that they're incompatible. And they both agree that the other side is false. And in the middle, some people try to say that determinism and free will are compatible. And both are true. Soft determinism, another form of compatibilism, and free actions, but free actions are determined, but determined by a way that's not a part of deterministic way, but as part of an internal causation. Anyway, this is the course. This is the course. Talking about the terms today. Next week, talking about what the philosophers and scientists have had to say. From Plato to quantum mechanics and into the 21st century. These are not by week, these are by parts. So this will take 2 weeks. Evolution, what does evolution have to say? We're a social mammal, aren't we? What do social mammals do? Because you're a certain social mammal, you act like a social mammal, right? Well, we'll get into that. And then social arguments, your culture, what society, you drive down the road. You don't have freedom to take that car through somebody's yard. You're stuck on the road. Therefore, your freedom is limited. In other words, that's a social thing. It's had nothing to do with any of these others. It's a social reason that you can't do other things you want to do. You can, but you'll be punished for it, and therefore you don't. Social arguments, and all of these have subjects. And then finally, what does neuroscience have to say about all this? Neuroscience is monitoring our brain waves about our choosing. So these are the 5 parts of the course, and some of these will obviously overlap into 2 weeks or so. And so looking at determinism, let's start with determinism. You don't have to know any of that stuff, other than those 2 main categories. Indeterminism is libertarianism, which is free will. Not determined, determined, not determined. Compatibilism, they like to say it's a kind of determinism because your will is a determining factor. But it's middle, I'm going to call it middle ground because that's the easiest way to think about it. But determinism, let's start with determinism. The notion that all events, including mental events like thoughts, have a cause. And that all things, physical and mental, are conditioned by their causes, and all are describable by scientific law. Those electronic things happening in your brain, or where your thoughts in it is measurable as an electronic thing in your brain. But then you say, yes, but the content of the thought is not possible to be measured electronically. Well, we'll get into that, where we suddenly have this gulf between what's happening measurable in the brain and what actually a thought looks like or feels like. But nonetheless, determinism says it's all coming from physical matter in your brain, all your thoughts, your ideas, your wants, your desires, your feelings. Everything has a cause. And this means that if determinism is false, you've got free will. If everything doesn't have a cause, or the cause can be, or if everything doesn't have a cause, then it's libertarianism, free will. If determinism is true, is free will possible? But compatibilism says yes, if your will is a determining factor. And if it's false, then hard determinism says, forget it. You ain't got no determinism. You ain't got no free will. It's all settled, and you're just living in an illusion that you have free choice. And I don't have to point out what importance this has in civil liberties, in criminal prosecutions, in social welfare programs, in education. You know, we're saying, the determinists are saying, the criminal is not guilty. He may have done it, but you can't blame him for it. And you can't blame anyone for anything they do to you, or you feel that they've done wrong. Doesn't matter who they are. They're acting in a way that had no choice but to act that way because of factors. And how that plays out, what those factors are, is very much a part of this course. So, determinism says everything has a cause, and that there are no uncaused causes. So determinism, varieties, hard or scientific determinism says this: there are no uncaused causes. Therefore, there are no miracles. There are no chance events. There's never chance doesn't happen. Miracles don't happen. Nothing is random. It may look random to you, but it's not really random if you really got down to it, and you could look at it in all its aspects. Every choice is an event, and every event is caused. What causes your will to do whatever the will decides to do? And theoretically, it says, given an ability to measure every particle in the universe, you could predict the future for all time. A supercomputer could do that. If you measured every motion of every particle in the universe, you could predict everything, which means, if that's true, then everything is set for all time. Well, predeterminism is the notion that it takes that same deterministic logic and it adds God to it. I knew God would get back into this class. It adds God to it, meaning that it ain't just the movement of physical particles and atoms. God's doing it all. But God is doing it in exactly the same way. So it's measurable in exactly the same way as whether it's mechanical or done by God. If there is a watchmaker, if there's a watch, there must be a watchmaker. If there's a clock, there must be a clockmaker. If there's a universe, there must be a universe maker, i.e. God. So if you got something out there, there must be somehow it was made. Yes, question.
Have free will to choose to make the universe?
Well, under predeterminism, the question, as far as I know, isn't asked. It enters under the next thing we're going to get to, is predestination. But the assumption is, of course, God has to be the fount of free will. He has to have free will if he exists.
So that it exists.
Mm-hmm. Then it exists for God, not for you. No. Yeah, but I don't think that's an issue with in that discussion. Its assumption is that as the universe is running, if whether God does it or mechanical machinery does it, it's the same. The effect is the same, and there's no free will in the present moment, at least. Whether there was at the Big Bang is a different question. So, if there's a universe, it's a clockwork universe. There is a clockmaker, a universe maker. We're talking here. You may recognize this as deism, predeterminism. Deism assumes that God wound up the universe like a clock and then said, I'm out of here. He said, let it run to the end of time, and he went and took a holiday, holy day. He's God, he can take holy days. Actually, he took a holy eternity. So he just sat back and it got it going, whoever God is, and it runs and it continues to run. Some people deists have tried to say God can step in and adjust the clock, but others say no. No miracles, obviously. So whatever the Bible says about miracles, no. Deists are interesting kinds of Christians. You're very much stand aside Christians and let the thing run and the thing runs. That way you can rationalize science with being a Christian. If you're saying God just started it and it's running forever. You may know that the founding fathers were mostly deists. Jefferson, Adams, Washington, these people were rational men who believed in science and reason, and therefore they then disbelieved in Christianity, so they settled on deism. We're Christians. Actually, Christ is a kind of intervention, isn't he? So that's a problem with deism. But at least they believe in a God, but a God who started it all and is now stepping back. No further divine interventions. And of course, that's a kind of determinism. Every event has happened, and every event is as it has happened. Now, can I get rid of that thing? Yeah, I should be able to get rid of that bar. It was the cursor off, yeah, out of the way, but it's supposed to disappear automatically, and it doesn't.
I'll come in, Professor. Just give me a sec.
All right. And more ... Got it. Hide. Thank you. Thank you for the more ... Hide floating meeting controls. Got it. It's not the computer's fault. It's just a machine. It doesn't have free will. No, it's now okay. Yeah, I just had to get rid of the meeting controls, and I did. So we're good. Thank you, Dawa. So where we go? Back up. Okay. There we go. This is just a quotation that sort of supports this position. And the variables are multiple. They're almost infinite in a universe. All the things that it can impinge upon things. But ultimately, it's all a mechanical working machine. Our choices are the result of particles coursing one way or another through our brains, of Dr. Brian Greene. Now, because of the number of variables and the complexity of the variables, it can be look very chaotic. Whether it be our life or the universe or read the newspapers, what's going on, it looks chaotic because we are very limited in what we can perceive and our ability to sort of rationalize it. But again, a supercomputer, theoretical supercomputer, might be able to take all of these motions and see them as following in predetermined paths, even though it looks like this to us. Get a little. Did I mention we're getting art into this class as well? A little bit modern art. Well, okay. That's a brief. Again, today's class is just about getting understanding the terms. It's touching on the terms. Then we'll get back into. We're not going to go deep into any one of these. We're going to look at the discussion, talking about all these different points of view as we go. Okay. Predestination. Predestination. That all events are made to happen, but not by God winding up the clock way at the beginning and then standing back and kicking back and having a beer. No, predestination says God is infinitely involved at every moment, and everything that happens is God's will. God is, I mean, Spinoza, whose God was the mechanical laws of the universe, would fit right in here. Predestination, God is running everything. There he is. In the moment, it's happening, and at every second is everything that happens, every cause, every event is God's causing it to happen. Which, okay, does that include our own thoughts? Well, logically it ought to. Each moment's causation is a miracle. We think of a miracle. Miracle, by definition, is something that happens outside of normal causal reason. Well, we're saying predestination says every instant is a miracle. Is created. And they don't say that the laws of nature don't exist, but they exist only as a metaphor in our mind for the consistency of what God does. So God's doing it, and we call them laws because it keeps looking like it follows certain patterns. A hard determinist would say, yes, there are laws of nature, and they follow these patterns because that's what physical matter does. We're saying a predestination person says it happens because of God's is consistent. But we didn't want to be consistent. He makes a miracle happen. He makes something that falls outside of. So, but nonetheless, this is still called determinism because there ain't us doing it. There's no free will. When I say free will, we're talking our free will, not God's. And predestination may ring a bell, but because of Ephesians. Blessed be God and the Father, our Lord Jesus Christ, who has blessed us in Christ with every spiritual blessing in the heavenly places. Even as he chose us, blah, blah, blah. He predestined us for adoption to himself as sons through Jesus Christ. Nothing about daughters, by the way, you notice. According to the purpose of his will. Predestined us to adoption to himself. So God is saying, Ephesians, not God, Ephesians, Paul is saying, God set us up to come to him, to choose to come to him as his sons, daughters, as his children, according to his will. So his will is that we should come to him. In the praise of his glorious grace, etc. In him we have redemption through his blood. Okay, so coming to him is what redeems us. That's our rebirth. And then a little further along, according to the riches of his grace, I should have underlined grace. Grace is, of course, what predestination people like Calvinists say. God gives you his grace. Without it, you're stuck. You have no free will to choose God. His grace has got to come to you because it says so right there. Lavished upon you. Making known to us the mystery of his will according to his purpose. Is his purpose again. Is his purpose. God's a very purposeful fellow, which he set forth in Christ as a plan, his plan. In him we have obtained an inheritance, having been predestined according to the purpose of him who works all things according to the counsel of his will. This is will again. So Ephesians predetermines everything, down to the fall of every sparrow. Or so it seems that the implication of this, and this is where, again, the Protestants, the more severe Protestants, like the Calvinists, and the Presbyterians, and Joseph Huss, and these people, look to come with the idea that God will deliver you or not, and it's his choice. You are predestined to choose Christ and follow Christ and go to heaven, or you're not, which is hard doctrine. But it seems to imply this in this passage. That's what Paul seems to be saying, which seems to be what this is saying too. It makes God responsible for evil. Or so it seems. Now, Christian theologians have wrestled with this thing since the time of Paul. And we'll touch a bit on that next week. But it's not, this is a bit cheeky, obviously, but it does tell you the dilemma of God having predestined us, and then well, wait a minute, that means all of our sins as well, all of our evils as well. No free will. So free will is not. It exists only if we choose, according to the way this is interpreted, we have one free choice, and that is to choose Christ. But predestination actually says you don't even have that. God's already decided it for you. But the theologians say that is your choice. And the fact you don't choose it, God predestined you not to choose it, but you're to blame for it. I mean, it's a mystery. It's something which, I mean, it's nothing, it's not news to anybody who's ever been to theology school. I mean, this is something they wrestle with. And again, we will touch on that later. But guys, they say God has already predestined that choice. It takes us actually, here's another way to look at it. God's predestiny is for all. This came from a Christian website. And the biblical view is not actually accurate because there's many ways to interpret the Bible. It is the predestination view, or the Calvinist view. God's predestiny for all mankind is to be conformed to the image of Christ. Free will means not everyone will choose this. So he's predestined us, but there's a possibility we don't choose it. Those who choose are conformed to his image. You have no more choice after that. You automatically are swept along by love of Christ to do good things and be a good person. And you no longer have the possibility of evil. So believing Christians cannot do evil unless they, well, again, that's also discussed. And those who do not choose Christ are not conformed to his image, and you go to heaven or you don't. When we're talking about causality, at some point, I got to bring in Aristotle, who's the first expert on causality. His 4 causes of anything. And we look, a chair, a stool, in that case, a dining stool, or whatever you want to call it. The material cause, what makes this thing that thing? Well, it's got to be immaterial. It's made of something. So material cause is wood. The efficient cause is the way in which it becomes what it becomes. And in the making of the world or of human beings, God is often called by Christians who understand Aristotle as the efficient cause. He sort of made the world. It was the making of it. The formal cause is a design ahead of time. As you make it, you got an image in your mind. So I'm taking this wood, which there would be no table without the wood. I'm working it because there'd be no table if I don't work the wood. I've got an idea where I'm going with that. So that's the formal cause is I'm going somewhere with it. I know what is going to happen. And the final is, what's the point of doing this anyway? It's got to have a purpose. The purpose is the final cause, the object, the reason, the end goal. So material cause, God made man in his substance with a physical body and a will to choose him, or theoretically not to choose him. The efficient cause is material cause is God gave us a physical body. The efficient cause is he formed us and then he offers us the creative thing of a second birth to reform us. Being reborn is being made into, is the efficient cause of the making of us into a saved person. The formal cause is God's plan from the beginning of as Ephesians just talked about. And then the final cause is that God has a purpose for all this. So although Christians often say God is the efficient cause, really God has to be all 4 causes. And if that's the case, then there ain't much room for free will if God is cause of all the various types of causes that happen that make a thing into what it is. Anyway, so that is types of determinism. Hard determinism, science, predeterminism, which is similar, but the clockwork universe, God started it all and then stepped back. And predestination, which is God making it all happen all the time. Well, so where does that put us? To the compromise positions and compatibilism or soft determinism. Yes, they say all physical events are caused. We're not going to deny science. And this is a distinction, by the way. Soft determinism is a phrase of William James, the American philosopher. Compatibilism, though, goes way back, but he called it soft determinism, which many people use the term now. There's small distinctions, but we need not get into them. Soft determinists say that we can still have a determined physical universe, but that doesn't affect the fact that we still make free choices. Both sides affirm physical determinism, which includes the actions we take because we're physical beings, but mental events aren't caused. A compatibilist, to rescue free will, has to rescue mental events and call them uncaused. Epiphenomenon, if you want, something that comes out of phenomenon but is not caused by the phenomenon or rises above the phenomenon. We get into metaphysics, of course. Our choices are mental events, and therefore they don't exist in the physical world. Obviously, you can't pick up your thought and carry it around. You can't poke it. You can't touch it. And therefore, it's not physical. Therefore, it's metaphysical. And therefore, it doesn't fit into the physical universe and is not controlled by cause and effect in the physical universe. And there's this gulf between the chemical things, the mechanical or chemical thing happening in your brain, and an actual thought, which no one has yet bridged that gap. And that gap is where compatibilists come in. And I'm not going to talk about all these different things: illusionism, impossibilism. Impossibilism says it's impossible that free will could ever exist. Illusionism says it's deterministic, but we need an illusion. The illusion is necessary. We'll get into that too, but we won't touch on that until maybe at the end. So, mental events are not caused. Probably can't even read that. Does it ever bother you? At the end of the day, everything is just like these dominoes, says the guy in the green. What do you mean, says the other guy? Well, from what we can tell, all events in the world are a mere product of their physical causes. Why in the world would I be bothered by causation? It would be rather troubling to a world to live in if it weren't for causation. Well, says the other guy in the green, no one is bothered by causation in the world, only that ourselves are a part of it. And all our actions are caused by our brain, and our brain is part of the world, which means all our actions are completely determined by prior causes. Our free will is nothing more than an illusion. Next panel, illusion? No, my friend, a rainbow is an illusion. It appears like a solid object, but as we investigate it closer, we discover there is no object, only refraction of light. Our will, however, is exactly as we practice it, as we perceive it. Like you said, all of our actions are caused by us and our brain. What? How can you say that our actions are causally determined? How can they be free? Because we still choose them. What else? Under what circumstances would you call a person free? I suppose, says the guy in the bottom left panel, I suppose if we had some kind of soul which controlled a body while it was outside the laws of the universe, then I would say the soul was free. The other guy. And we're not free because we have no such soul? Exactly. We're only physical bodies, and our decisions are entirely controlled by the laws of the universe. Stannis, my friend, you have some very strange notions. He bailed out of the conversation. So, compatibilist, which is the guy on the right, the guy in the gray, says, yeah, we're caused by the will, but the will is a cause, its own cause. It's an uncaused cause. Outside the world of causation. Another way of looking at compatibilism, take us back to the Stoics, where Seneca said that you're free if your will is aligned with universal causation. Again, Seneca, the Stoics also couldn't deny the rational scientific logic of causation, universal causation. The will, however, is free because you are freely choosing to follow what you have to do. You tell your kid does X. Don't want the kid to do X. You train them not to do X and do Y. Pretty soon, they do Y because they want to. That's free. That's freedom. That's called freedom. The dog. Seneca's example was the dog. The dog is tied to the handcart. I couldn't find a image of a dog, actually handcart dog actually following a handcart instead of one broken one, poor dog. I did on the other, on to the right is a dog tied to a little, scooter. And the dog is following the handcart in Seneca's example. He's tied to it, but he wants to follow it. It's his master's in the handcart. And besides, he has no choice, but he's following willingly. So that's free will according to the Stoics. That one on the right obviously is in Britain because the slow lane is on the left side, not the right side, and the fast lane is to the right. Anyway, so our choices are, according to this view of compatibilism, our choices are restricted to willing the next moment, despite the fact it's inevitable. I want to be here. This actually is a good marital harmony, and therapists would say that when I don't want to go to this thing. My wife might think, I don't want to go. Want to go there. Make it something you really want to do. Then you go without going grudgingly, but make it something you want to go to do. And therefore you've now made it your will. So that's one way you can claim freedom. It doesn't fit everyone's understanding of what freedom really ought to be, but that's one way of talking about compatibilism. One way, or let it be, or just let it be. All right. Another compromise position is fatalism. Doesn't sound like one, but it is. See, there's philosophy everywhere. All events are deterministic. They're fixed in advance. Well, not all events. Basic events are fated to happen. Determinism, predeterminism, predestination says all events are fatalism says not all. The classic example, of course, is poor old Oedipus. Fatalism says that major events are fixed in advance by whatever, God or some unknown agent or an evil demon or whatever you want, or Zeus, or you choose it. But there's free play in unimportant stuff. Fatalism does not suppose causality, universal causality, and you can have choice where it doesn't matter that much. Or your free choices lead you to a predetermined ending, even though each choice is free. The fatalists don't care how you got to the ending, only that you get to the point you're fated to go. There's a million ways of getting there, and all of them are free choices, but at the end of the day, you're going to get there. And major events like I would say birth, that wasn't your choice. Neither is death, but major life turning points. And at the end of the day, what will be, and there's nothing we can do about it, but there's all kinds of free play getting there. For example, a soothsayer or a bad dream tells you you're going to die of terrible burns on your body at 10:02 in the morning, Saturday morning. And you say, oh my God. So you get in your car and you drive to the airport to get away. But on the way to the airport, you run into a semi filled with petrol, and then you linger in the hospital until exactly 10:02 on Saturday morning and you die. Or you decide, I'm staying in my bed. I'm not leaving the house. I'm saving the bed. And of course, there's an electrical fault in the wall, catches fire. Your house burns down and you end up dying at 10:02 in the morning, Saturday in the hospital, whatever. You make these choices, but you end up where fate takes. And fate was something the ancient Greeks very much believed in. Oedipus, he made all these choices, but he was headed for the horror of his fate to marry his mother and to have killed his father, marry his mother, and end up blinded. You can't avoid it, even though he made choices along the way. How he got there was not determined. A classic example of this is the appointment in Samara story. This is from the Babylonian Talmud. And it was republished here by John O'Hara, but first republished by Somerset Maugham. Anyway, the very brief story, appointment in the appointment in Samara. There's a merchant in Baghdad who sent his servant to the market to buy vegetables. A little while later, the servant comes rushing back, white and trembling, and said, "Master, just now when I was in the marketplace, I was jostled by a woman in the crowd, and when I turned, I saw it was Death who jostled me. She looked at me and made a threatening gesture. Quick now, lend me your horse, and I will ride away from the city and avoid my fate. I will go to Samara, and there Death will not find me." The merchant lent him his horse, and the servant mounted it, and he dug in his spurs in its flanks, and as fast as the horse could gallop, he went to Samara. Puzzled, the merchant went down to the marketplace, and there he saw Death standing there in the crowd, and went to her. "Why did you make a threatening gesture to my servant when you saw him this morning?" "That was no threatening gesture," says Death. "I was surprised to see him in Baghdad, because I had an appointment with him tonight in Samara." That is fate. All right. Let's take a break and see you back at the top of the hour.
Excuse me, Professor, just a reminder about your mic. We can't hear you online.
Get it all the time. Okay.
Perfect.
All right. A question came up, and I usually say this. I forgot to say at the beginning. If anyone likes a particular slide, write the title of the slide and email it to me, and I'll try to put my email in the chat, or email it to them, and they'll forward it to me. Saying, "I like this slide, and this slide," then I'll send it. The whole slideshow, no, it's still a copyright issue on the whole slideshow, but I'll send you any individual slides, a handful of slides if they particularly interest you, and be happy to. Handful of the images. However, it's also you're getting a recording, right? So you can puzzle over the slides at your leisure anyway. So, and then take a screenshot if you want to. But anyway, so that is a possibility. Okay, so we were finishing up with fatalism, which is character is fate, said Heraclitus. We'll get into character too as one of the determining factors in a later class. You're destined to go a certain place, and we talked about the appointment of Samara and the best, and Islam, inshallah, is I mean, God wills. You can take that in any different ways. You can take it as a predestination statement, but the way they use it in conversation is a kind of fatalist statement. They're not saying whether God wills every moment. They're saying God's got the big stuff taken care of. Like when I die, God decreed my birth, and He'll decree my death, and that's a kind of freedom. Oh yes, well then I don't have to worry about it. I can go out and get myself shot, and whatever. So, inshallah, it's a kind of fatalistic attitude. All right. So, indeterminism. It's a phrase you probably won't hear much after today. Normally, it's determinism, compromise, and free will. But indeterminism is a bit wider because it includes free will and it includes chance. But the categories where the will is not denied, or in the case of compatibilism, where the will is not tightly limited or achieved by a difficult thing called, say, magic, or metaphysical. It's not made metaphysical. It's indeterminism denies that universal determinism is true. It says not all events. It's happy to say that physical world is still doing its thing, but it's all events aren't caused, including therefore what we talked about before, the fatalistic idea that the major events are set, your fate. Indeterminism say there's nothing absolutely set, that the physical world will follow the laws of physics, but there's plenty of room in there for things not to occur, for you not be able to predict what's going to happen. It allows for free will. It allows for miracles. It allows for causality, chance, and chaos. Some things are caused, some events are caused, and some are not caused by earlier events. So here we are on the right side of this thing. Libertarianism. Incompatibilism is essentially, well, we don't get into that. But anyway, don't worry about these. But libertarianism, and we'll get to that in a minute, the difference between liberalism and libertarianism. But that's all on the side of free will. But before we get to that, there is chance. And chance is something which implies that it's not following the laws of physics. It's two kinds of chance: randomness or mechanical chance. Mathematical chance. Randomness, the first kind. The Latin word chance comes from cadere, which is to fall, same as in Italian and probably Spanish as well, to fall, a falling, like the fall of dice. Although, if you know, to sit here and talk about events and have Albert staring at me here, this as if, again, God is watching, right? I can't get it wrong. Albert's going to give me a scowl. Right next to two clocks, but you guys at home can't see Albert over there. Einstein staring at me with two clocks, relativity of time, etc., all of that. Nice placement there. Anyway, at the etymology, the word origin of that word talks about leaning away, falling, leaning away from the nominative case. So the genitive, the dative, and the accusative case sort of take you away from the straightforward nominative case. And your Latin students in here took Latin in school. The idea of falling, the idea of decadence, decaying away from a perfect thing, perfect structure, or in his case, perfect causation. The German word is Zufall, or chance, luck, coincidence, randomness. But luck or coincidence are interesting because luck or coincidence imply that it's only as perceived. It was lucky that you came here today, but okay, luck is because I couldn't have predicted it. That X happened. I was lucky that X happened in my favor because I couldn't, or bad luck. Anyway, something happened that I did not predict. And coincidence, something I did not predict. Those aren't strictly chance because those might have happened by deterministic ways, just that I wasn't aware that's what was going to happen. So it's as perceived, a luck or coincidence, although the Germans have the same word for the whole thing. Did not see it coming. But randomness is different. And randomness actual randomness is inconsistent, obviously, with mechanical determinism. Determinism says nothing is random. Everything is caused in a causal chain. But it was very important to the ancient philosophers, the idea, the difference between a determined universe and randomness or chance. Leucippus, who stated the first definition of determinism, He was the first atomist. Democritus invented the idea of the atom, the tiny indissoluble little particle that all matter was built out of. An astonishing insight. Of course, he did it only by a mental exercise. He couldn't see that small, but he determined there must be a tiny particle that all matter is made of. They called them atomists. And Leucippus was actually the first person, he and Democritus together, sort of. But he said that nothing occurs by chance, but there is a reason, logos, and a necessity for everything. So he denied chance as an original atomist. He's very much the basis for the deterministic mechanical universe. But along comes his disciple, Epicurus, who bought into the whole thing equally. He said absolutely there's that universe. But in the midst of this early universe, atoms flying around, or not flying around, atoms actually going in a regulated way, in a way that was absolutely determined by the laws of physics, one atom swerved by chance. And the whole thing happened. Before that, it was just atoms floating through space. One atom goes, bumped into another one, caused a train wreck of atoms, caused the whole universe to develop. The swerve. And this book was about the rediscovery of Lucretius, who was Epicurus's disciple, who wrote that book, De Rerum Natura, about many things, but the swerve was one of them. And then this best-selling book was about rediscovering Lucretius. But this is the idea of chance is something which was not caused, but simply happened. Whenever something happens, people always say why. You see, everyone believes in free will, but when something happens, we say why. I'm looking for the cause. So I want to fit it back into that causal chain. So we ourselves are inconsistent about this. So randomness.
At random, when lightning hits a tree and you're standing on the tree, it kills you.
Yes, lightning strikes the tree and you stand on the tree. That's bad luck. Of course, that from our point of view, it's random. Yeah. A supercomputer could identify the lean of the tree and how the lightning struck it and have predicted that, but that we have no such machine that can do that. So it's effectively random when a tree falls. Yeah, something like that happens. Yeah. So that's random. Then there's mechanical chance, which is something mathematics deals with all the time. Which essentially is probability. The probability of a future occurrence can be calculated by mathematics. A coin toss, obviously. An equal chance of heads or tails. But that's actually only equal if the coin had no width. So there's no chance of it landing on its edge. And there's no head engraved in the coin or tails engraved in the coin, because those engravings cause the thing no longer to be perfectly symmetrical and they imbalance it. So technically, when you say a coin is 50-50, you have to assume that it has no width and it has an even the sides are exactly even. But the question is two kinds of mechanical chance. That's a priori chance. A priori, a coin flip should give me 50-50. The probability of future events happening can be calculated. Then there's a posteriori, a priori, a posteriori, which is after the fact, which is the probability of something happening can be determined from previous events. The sun will come up tomorrow because it always has. Looking back on history and saying this will happen, guaranteed. But it's not guaranteed. The sun might not come up tomorrow. It's not 100%. Mathematical chance doesn't have to be 100%. But so a priori is predicting. A posteriori is predicting based upon something you know about the thing you're playing with, and posteriori is something that is predicted based upon previous occurrences. The sun will come up, or whatever. There's many examples. but nowhere, but mathematical chance is probability, and not guaranteed. You know, there's always the black swan, you know, the story of the black swan, all swans are white. It said everybody, there's absolute certainty until someone showed up in Australia and found a black swan. That philosophy fell on his face because it said, oh my goodness, even you can't depend upon anything. Yeah. You bringing him in again? God does not play dice with the universe. We're talking about a determinist here, and yeah, a scientific determinist. But he's also the guy, and we'll get into this next week or the week after, quantum mechanics, which brings in the question of an indeterminacy that can't be predicted. And where does that put us? So quantum indeterminacy. God does not play dice with the universe, said Einstein, because he didn't like the idea of quantum indeterminacy. And he said, no, that's not, he said, no, it's all guaranteed by, I mean, it has to follow causally. You can't just throw in this wild decay of an atom that can't be predicted. Huh? Said the quantum people. Yes, you can. So, mathematical chance can be considered compatible with determinism, but only when we introduce the element of our ignorance. So mathematical chance, you know, the coin flip can be perfectly predicted if a machine knew the actual weight of the head on one side and weight of the tail on the other side, and we had a perfect coin. In other words, it's the imperfection of our knowledge or the world that makes mathematical chance not 100% guaranteed, but it could be if we knew in advance, if the initial conditions, put it that way, they said the initial conditions were the same thing would happen every time, the initial conditions. Obviously, when you flip a coin, the strength of your flip changes every time you do it. If it didn't, you would have the same result, but it doesn't. So if you knew the exact shape matter, geometry, center of gravity of the coin, etc., it would, exact amount of force applied, the wind velocity when you flipped it, the relative humidity of the air when you flipped it, on and on and on and on. Then you could. So mathematical chance is not 100% assured. It's just based upon a certain amount of ignorance on our part. And finally, we come to free will. Free will and indeterminism, which includes chance. And you don't see the word free will up there, but you see the word liberty. Liberty, freedom, think of the negative sense we started out today's class from. Freedom from oppression, a negative sense. Liberty in politics is the absence of authoritarianism. I'm free because I can do what I want, and no government is telling me what I can do. Damn it, got to vote for the right president and to get the government off our backs. So that's liberty. Libertarianism is a political idea. Libertarianism is also, as an economic idea, is laissez-faire economics. That is to say, no external authority is interfering with doing my business or with my economics or the world's economics. Free markets, say everybody, although every country protects its own with tariffs. But free markets, untrammeled economic relations between individuals. Sounds great in theory. Presupposes that these individuals are all starting from the same place in terms of their ability to take advantage of the freedom. But that's freedom. It's mostly considered negative freedom, freedom from oppression, from interference. And then liberalism is freedom. Again, it's a political idea. It's also a social idea. Freedom of thought, of conscience, no coercion by religion, no coercion by any doctrine. But the positive idea of liberalism is to empower. Remember, now we had talking about a negative liberty. The one political side says, get those forces off my back that are preventing me from doing what I want. And the other side says, empower those who don't have all these advantages and give them a power to express the liberty that these other people have. So these are two different political doctrines, and a negative, take it off, a hindrance, and a positive to empower. And by empowering these people, you're also giving them an advantage that these people don't have by giving them resources. You're trying to even the playing field, but then government's coming in and restricting what they're doing by giving these people freedom. You're taking away some of theirs, or so the point. So it seems to work in practice. So all the words of libertarianism and liberty, these words keep shifting. Also in their political meaning, keep shifting, because libertarians are those who believe in free markets and get the government off my back, but liberals are those who often favor of government policies to help out those who are disadvantaged. So, and it's the opposite sides of the spectrum. And it's all part of the whole debate. But liberalism in the negative sense is what the Romans called homo homini res sacra. Humans is reverenced by humans. That is, the human being is the ultimate agent that you have to free up. In other words, the human being is our most important agent, and it's an implication of free will. Give people the power, but let them freely exercise exercise that power. It's not making a statement about philosophical free will, but that's where these words libertarianism often is used also to imply philosophical free will. And again, we'll get into that. But most philosophical free will people talk about these conditions. The agent, you or I, must have been able to do otherwise. You could have not come to this class, so you did come to this class, or you could have stayed home like these folks over here on the screen, who, with their cup of coffee, sitting nicely in their easy chairs over there, or doing their exercises. But you came here, or you didn't, or you made a choice. Been able to do otherwise. Now, the question is, were you prevented from going out because of the rain, or because your car doesn't work, or because whatever, expecting a phone call, or because of internal constraints such as I'm lazy, or I didn't feel like it today, whatever, and wherever that feeling came from, or I was raised to be a person who did stuff and sort of take my responsibility was to come here because I signed up for the class. All these things are, the agent must have been able to do otherwise, but that simple statement is open to all kinds of interpretation. What do you mean able to do otherwise? Physically able, no negative imposition stopping me, or internal constraints such as my own lassitude, or my foot hurt today, or whatever. I could have come, and that's internal. And so how do you define that as having been able? Second thing is the act must originate in the agent, not in external forces. You can't have somebody ordering you to do it. So that's, again, negative liberty. You can't have some reason. It's not free if you're forced to do it by any force. And the question is, as often come up, what if you're hypnotized? That's not an outside force. You're doing it. Someone just changed the conditions of your mind, but it's not enforced on you. And three, the action must be rational and comprehensible. This is interesting, but it means that someone who's wildly out of control, crazy, is not considered to be free. Someone who has a mental problem, or is acting weirdly, or is on drugs or something, is not considered to be free. Or therefore, and it's sort of a back attribution of they're not responsible for their behavior in a way, because they didn't know what they were doing at the time, is a way of being unfree, even though we want to make them responsible, but it's an odd, difficult place in the law, or even in human relations. But those are the three things that the actual free will advocate would say is absolutely necessary in its fullest sense. Have been able to do, must have been able to do otherwise is the key phrase, and that one is again a difficult one to sort out, to define. But neurologically, free will or determinism on the right is there's something happens in your brain. The electrical impulses in your neurons cause you to be aware of something and causes you to have an idea and causes an action. It all starts with something you hadn't chosen, which is your brain's wiring, and how that wiring was done in your early life and your genetics and such. Free will says the intention itself is coming from a place that's not connected to the wiring. It's coming out of a different place. It's coming from a kind of spiritual, metaphysical place. And because the intention causes the brain to have an idea, and the idea leads to action. So brain activity follows from the will on the upper left, conscious intentions, the idea is capital will. So our actions depend upon us. There's that phrase. But depending upon us, who is us? Are we a self? We're back to the guy in the cartoon about the soul. Is there some sort of homunculus, some sort of spirit in us that's really us? It's not our physical body. It's not the squishy thing up here in our cranium. There's an us in there somewhere that's willing. Not just the brain. It's something that's willing these things to happen in the brain. So if our actions depend upon us, you have to define who us is. So there's a problem of free will. Free will has two basic problems, one of which is free will assumes or allows for the physical world to be mostly determined. If it wasn't, like the cartoon said, we depend upon determinism. I depend upon this cup to hold the tea. I depend upon my feet, the gravity to work. I depend upon the car when I turn it for all those mechanics to work automatically. And when it doesn't, I know there's a cause, a mechanical cause. Everything, we depend upon the world to be deterministic physically. But then the free will person said, okay, where's that? How do you rationalize that with your thoughts, with your things that you say aren't physical? Where do they come from? Religionists often say they come from God. This is you're back to predestination. But where do they come from? And that's something free will has to struggle with. And free will also has to struggle with moral responsibility. I mean, free will doesn't. Free will says, since we have free will, we are responsible. It's determinism that must answer the question about moral responsibility. So each has an issue to struggle with. There he is. We have a Sam Harris reader in here. I'll get to that in a minute. So the idea of free will and reconciling it with randomness or determinism. And randomness or determinism are really only two possible alternatives to free will. It's either determined or it's random. Even soft determinism is a kind of determinism, or you have free will. And so it's a mess. It's a cloud. This is interesting. Again, I find some of these slides rather than put them together myself. Some cases I do. Free will implies freedom. Yeah, understandable. Peace. Why does peace go in there? Success. Success often depends upon you doing something that you know is going to cause. I'm doing Y because I know it's going to cause X, or X is going to cause Y. I have success. If the world was out there was random, if what I did didn't cause something to happen in the way I thought it would happen, I can't possibly have success unless I luck into it. So success doesn't depend upon free will, although free will people might say it does. Responsibility is an interesting question. And all of these things, bravery, I don't know who makes up these things, all kinds of choosing love. We'll get into that, etc. This cloud, free will cloud. And in summary, do we have free will? No. Is there determinism? Yes, hard determinism. Do we have free will? No. Is the world determined? No. Hard incompatibilism, something we don't get into much. Do we have free will? Yes. Is the universe determined? Is all things determined? Yes. We have soft determinism, where everything's determined except there is this medical physical thing called the will. And do we have free will? Yes. Determinism? No. We're absolutely into the full free will people. There's your essential categories. Well, that's the essential terminology that will bounce around, which was number one on this list. Part one. This is the handout, which you guys home, it's on their website. I'm not close enough to the camera so you can see it. Anyway, so part two is arguments from reason, faith, and science. This takes us into the philosophical side of things. The classical debate, the ancient Greeks and Romans, the religious debate, the church trying to understand how we can be accused, how we can be praised or blamed or saved or not saved based upon our free choice. The Renaissance, we ignited that classical debate. And where's the debate now? Gets us into quantum mechanics. That's part two, could be next week and the week after. Evolutionary arguments gets me into a favorite area, subject of mine. How do we evolve? The innate drives, pleasure, pain, sex, and violence as motivators. Our gregariousness, our tribal. I mean, you guys are all here together, except you guys, all here together because we're a gregarious species. So that's a drive that pulls us together. You don't choose to be gregarious. You were born that way, except for the few who were born as more introverted and solitary, but no one's totally solid. Even the people who live alone have the radio on or the TV on a lot because we're still a gregarious species. Tribalism and all the manifestations of tribalism, political tribalism, nation-state tribalism, dominance hierarchy. Do we have to always elect two elderly white guys? Is that our choice? What about this alpha male thing that people seem to gravitate towards? Look at gender roles, psychology of the family, and where are your loyalties and why? You don't like your sister, but she's your sister, so you're loyal to her. Where does that come from? And all these are determining factors that shape our behavior. The biological basis for morality, with morality coming out of our genetics, religion coming out of the genetical, biological morality. I mean, I'm not saying these are proven, these are all discussion topics. And then part four, environment. Another interesting idea about we're enmeshed into a vast system of our society that sort of almost controls everything we do. You know, you have to do things this way because that's why the thing works. You have, like I said, driving along the car, or you can't just go home. You have to leave the room, walk out the door, walk down the street, get onto the bus, or go to your car. All these things are things you would not do if you didn't have to. And also the clothes you wear, everything about our society and our culture is something that are determining factors in who we are. We're back to the dog and the cart. I do these because I want to do them. Well, you've been trained to want to do them. If you grew up in a different culture, you wouldn't have those sorts of determinants. So all of these, language, the architect, the sources of inequality, that's an interesting question. And then neuroscience. Neuroscientists love testing us out to see where our choices come from, where our decisions come from. And also sociologists, looking back at the human nature from a distance, what patterns do we normally form based on our social economic group? All of this. And then where do we go from here? How do we save moral responsibility? Or we decide that free will is true and we don't have to worry about it. And then the other handout is the reading list. It should be called the sources list, including the book Free Will. But these are. I don't intend anyone to buy all these books. You find one that looks interesting, buy it if you're interested. If not, just sit in the class and we'll meet most of these guys, and I'll give a summary of what many of them think, and then other more specific things. Particularly interesting is this one, the video, the 4 centuries of the century of the self, how the advertising commercial world shapes our desires and controls us. Makes us want things or not want things. And then there's also one on how to live the spiritual life, which is understanding the fact that many people, or all of us, don't have a choice in what we are, what we do and who we are, and where's the compassion in that, in understanding that. It gets us into the law and such, which will be the part of the last class. Any questions? Question, yes, Becky.
Free will. But faith is not absolutely the spectrum from sane to insane.
Yes.
Somewhere along the line is someone
Well, yeah, okay. If we're acting in whatever crazy means or illogical manner or irrational manner, not that we're logical or rational when we're sane either. Someone's acting particularly crazy, they're assumed not to be acting freely. They're under control of, in the old days, it was a demon. You know, you got to get this little demon in you, forcing you to do this, but you're not responsible. Therefore, you weren't free when you went out of control and were so drunk, you walked around and smashed the furniture. We may hold you responsible. Yeah, there's a whole spectrum. And at what point do you, it's all highly subjective. Do we decide then? So no, this is just general way to looking at it, but there's no way to break it down. But legally, morally, we like to say, I don't care how drunk you were or how high on drugs you were, you're responsible for having put yourself in that position. But in that position, what you did there was out of your rational control. It's yeah.
Sorry, I'm struggling with this slide.
Yes.
On the determinant side, as I understand it, it's yes, there is determinism, or no, there is not determinism.
Yes.
Okay. But if there is not determinism, how can there be hard incompatibilism?
Hard incompatibilism is not something we've mentioned. I've sort of slipped over that one. Hard incompatibilism is a way of saying that hard meaning we're totally determined to be incompatible with determinism. Therefore, we believe that determinism does not exist, that the physical laws of the universe don't follow guaranteed patterns. And causality is not guaranteed. This is a very extreme form of libertarianism.
Hard incompatibilism.
Severe. Yeah.
But incompatibilism there, what is incompatible?
It's incompatible. Freedom and compatibilism is trying to say free will and determinism can coexist. Incompatibilism, which is determinism and absolute free will, say no, they can't exist, and one is not true. One of the two is absolutely not true. So hard incompatibilism is saying that determinism is absolutely not true, and that you can't depend upon it, and it's completely free. Whereas libertarianism allows more flexibility. No free will, no determinism. Well, I'll come back with a definition of incompatibilism. Yeah.
The hard incompatibilism, take in math.
Take what?
Take in math.
Math? Yeah, mathematics. Good question. I don't know how I would apply mathematics to it, but probably it can be. I'll look into it. Good question. I don't know. Yeah.
Hard determinism.
Yes.
There doesn't seem to be any space for moral choice.
Exactly.
Where there is free will, there is no determinism. Everything is moral choice.
It's true. True. In fact, yeah, where there is no determinism and everything is flexible, then there's morality all over the place. You're wading hip deep in it, and you can't avoid it. It could be a hopelessly confusing and desperate place. So, good point. Yeah.
Hard determinism will not allow for any like kind of quantum mechanics, some random thing.
No, that's yeah.
Does fit into that, where it basically says that, yeah, you know, there's a law of physics, but then every once in a while something can go off.
Yeah.
Which is also.
Yeah, it depends. I mean, at what level you're talking about. Obviously, determinism has suffered a kind of wound with quantum mechanics, that the whole world, all matter is determined. They're stuck with that idea that at some level it's not. Other respond to that by saying at other levels it is. When you got the Newtonian physics and our lives, which are far above the quantum level, then all those physical laws, all those Newtonian laws work, and work every time deterministically. So this little corner of things called quantum mechanics is some people said it's a little aberration, and maybe it's just we haven't figured out yet how that works. Maybe there are other dimensions in which it's not a random event. The decay of an atom is not, which you can't predict, is not random.
And it also doesn't answer, I mean, you know, you can be lucky or unlucky depending upon what circumstances you're born into, right? And so there's an element of chance in that, right? It's not, you're not predetermined prior to birth where you're going, you might be based on a religious concept, but on a scientific deterministic one with you.
A deterministic one, yes, yes. Your birth, all of that, your circumstances are all set ahead of time. Your luck and unluck is only from your own point of view. Yeah, your stance. All back to the Big Bang. And by the way, the new system here allows the people at home to hear your questions also. So, and also to hear your side comments, probably they're listening in too. Anything else?
Fun fact about fate,
Yes.
in the musical Kismet.
Kismet, fate.
One of the characters sings a song called It's Fate, Baby, It's Fate, and the whole song is about fate. And I think that's wonderful.
Yeah. Maybe I'll bring it in another class where we'll watch some Kismet. Yes, yes. It's fatalism in a big sense. Where we end up is fate, not every little moment, but the big picture is fated. All right. See you next week. Thank you. See you guys next week too out there in Zoom land.